Hello and welcome to a special Q&A recording of City Hall, one of the 50 official selection titles at the 45th Toronto International Film Festival. This film plays as part of TIFF Docs, which is generously sponsored by A&E Indie Films. My name is Tom Powers, and I'm TIFF's documentary programmer, celebrating my 15th year at the festival. I'm extremely honored to be here with the film's director, Frederick Wiseman, who's calling in from a little town in Burgundy, France. I want to thank you to the audience for joining us. In this year of COVID-19, we are extremely grateful for your support to keep TIFF going for years to come. This film is eligible for the People's Choice Award. You can vote for your favorite films at tiff.net/vote. Fred, thank you so much for being here. Over the last 11 years, we've had 9 of your films in the festival. That's more than any other filmmaker that I've programmed, and maybe more than any other filmmaker of anywhere in the festival the last 11 years. Those films that we've shown recently have been based in Paris and New York, Berkeley, California, Texas, Indiana. And since this film, City Hall, is about Boston, I want to ask you about your own family history in Boston. How did your parents come to be in Boston, and what was it like for you growing up there?
Well, my father came to Boston from the Ukraine in 1890 when he was 5 years old. And my mother was the only one of her 9 brothers and sisters who was born in America. The rest all were born in Poland. So it's a typical American Jewish immigrant story. My father went to high school and grammar school, high school, and law school in Boston, and I grew up in Boston. But before we get started, I want to thank you for the nice introduction and for including me so many times in the documentary section in Toronto. It's great for me and great for my films.
Well, it's been our pleasure to have you back year after year. And so when you were growing up in Boston, what was that Boston like?
It was a very segregated city. There were Irish, Italian, Jewish, and WASP neighborhoods. And they had very little to do with each other. And there was a small Black neighborhood. And it was a series of ghettos. I mean, with a little bit of seepage, but not very much. I mean, just to give you an example, my father was appointed a judge in 1930 on the Boston Municipal Court, and he would have been the first Jewish judge on the court. But the nomination was withdrawn by Henry Cabot Lodge Sr., the grandfather of the man who was ultimately the senator from Massachusetts, who was also then a senator, but the political boss of Massachusetts, on the grounds he didn't want a Jew on the court. And it was a city filled with prejudice, anti-Semitic, anti-Irish, anti-Italian, anti-immigrant.
Right.
That was Boston has changed a lot since then.
So I'm curious how much you think of Boston as a home. In the last 50 years, you've made films in 17 different states around the U.S. So it feels like you've either been on the road or hunkered down editing for the last decade or more. You've spent a lot of time in Paris making films there and doing some of your editing there. So what does Boston mean to you today?
Well, I mean, I haven't lived much in Boston in the last 17 or 18 years, but I still consider Cambridge, which is a city right next to Boston, my home. But I enjoyed living in Paris, and I've edited a lot of the recent films in Paris. And 10 years ago, I shot 3 or 4 films in Paris.
So your very first film in 1967, Titicut Follies, was based in Massachusetts. You made another film called Near Death, set in a hospice in Boston. But of the more than 40 films you've made, this is only the third time you've made a film in Massachusetts. And I wonder if that's been by accident or design because you were searching elsewhere.
Well, a little of each. Since one of my goals is to make a series of films about contemporary American life as it's expressed in and through institutions that are quite common, I thought it would be good to make the films in different parts of the country. So I think I haven't made the count recently, but I think I've worked in 17 states.
That was my count. Yeah. And so the fact that this one, you're coming back to Boston, was that by accident or design?
Well, I mean, it's because I got permission in Boston. I wrote letters to 4 or 5 mayors, and 2 didn't respond at all, and 2 responded with no. And the woman who was the head of the policy planning section in the mayor's office asked me to come in and see her. And she got the letter because the letter I sent to the mayor was opened by his secretary, who happened to have seen some of my films and liked them, and suggested to the mayor that he consider the possibility. And so he gave the letter to the woman who was head of his policy planning. And Karen Konachek and I, Karen was my assistant, went in to see her. And she said yes. So it was like so much else in my film, it was chance.
Uh-huh. And were there kind of ground rules established in that original conversation?
Well, there were ground rules. I basically had permission to shoot anything I wanted, except that I was asked. I didn't do anything connected with the political aspects. I mean, the political in the sense of the campaign aspects of his work, but I had access to all the activities of City Hall, and all the various departments at City Hall, housing, police, fire, etc.
And did you establish any kind of rapport with Mayor Walsh? Were there conversations you had off camera?
Well, I mean, he was very open to the idea of the film. He liked the idea of the film, and I as those of you who see the film will remark, I mean, he's in the film a lot because he's all over the place. But I also tried to show the activities of people who ran various departments or who worked various departments. So I tried to give a selection of the work that was done at City Hall and on behalf of City Hall by the various departments that came under the jurisdiction of the mayor. So I spent a lot of time with the mayor, but generally in situations where he was on the road in different parts of the city.
You talked about the legacy of Boston as being a ghettoized and racist city. Mayor Walsh in the film talks about the reputation of racist Boston and how it's something that he wants his administration to put in the past. Today, the city demographics have substantially changed. Only 45% of the city is white, from what I understand. I wonder what you've observed about that legacy of racist Boston.
Well, it's very different in my childhood, which was a long time ago. Mayor Walsh, I think, was elected because he put together a coalition of all racial and ethnic groups living in the city. And his staff is extremely diverse, both racially, ethnically, and sexually. And he's worked very hard, as I think his predecessor did, to eliminate the image of Boston as a racist city. It doesn't mean, I suppose, that there aren't pockets of it left, but the city hall and the ideology of the administration is very forward-looking and very progressive.
When you set out more than 50 years ago with this idea in mind to cover institutions that you followed through on for the last 5 decades, what were you hoping to learn when you started out?
Well, I mean, I don't know that I was basically hoping to have a good time and trying to make as good movies as I could. I don't. I think you know, unless it sounds pretentious in a more general sense, I was hoping to learn something about the country that I was brought up in and lived in, and wanted to, thought it'd be interesting to explore America in film terms. Because the technology that I use was only really invented in the late 50s, but the opportunity to make film, synchronous sound films with, in the beginning, 16 millimeter cameras meant that you could make a film on any subject where there was enough light. And so that discovery really opened up the world. You could make a film about anything as long as you had enough light to shoot. And so there were, I don't know, tens or hundreds of thousands of great subjects that hadn't been touched. And I simply, in doing Titicut Follies, which is the first film about a prison for the criminally insane, I thought what you could do with a prison for the criminally insane, you could do with other institutions. So I had the idea for an institutional series. And it seemed to me that an appropriate follow-on to a prison for the criminally insane was a high school. And, then I tried almost every year after that to make a film on a different subject consistent with this institutional series.
And after 50 years of doing that, what do you think you've taken away? As you look back on those films, do you think about ways in which institutions have changed or haven't changed? Do you think about what those films say about the United States?
Well, Tom, I'm not very good at that kind of generalization because, and I what they say about the United States is what you see in looking at all the films. And I think I try to resist generalizing because it would sound pretentious and bullshit.
Well, let me draw you to specifics. In City Hall, what are some of your favorite moments that you captured in this film?
Some of the favorite moments I captured had to do with the genuine interest of the people who worked for the city in helping others. I mean, that was the mayor's goal, and that point of view, I think, was represented by the people who he hired to do the day-to-day work in the various departments. He genuinely cares about offering the best possible services, and I think the people you see performing those services in the film are examples of professionals who care about their work and want to do it in a responsible way. And I didn't set out to make an anti-Trump film, but the film, it becomes an anti-Trump film because the professionals, the mayor and the people who work for City Hall in Boston are people who care and believe in the democratic process and the democratic norms. And their work is an illustration of that, so that the film becomes, because of Trump's horrible behavior, it represents everything that he doesn't stand for.
Well, Fred, I want to thank you again for this film and for all the films you've brought to us, for being here with us now in this highly unusual situation, and making the efforts to do that. It's been a great journey to show these films with you.
Well, thank you, Tom, and I appreciate your consistently showing them in Toronto. It's great for me and great for the films.
All right. Well, have a good day, Fred.
You too. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.